Hi, welcome back. This is Mark's Headroom. This is week 13 of this series on YouTube where I break a fast after 5 days of fasting. I eat for 2 days, then I repeat and fast again for 5 days. Been doing that for over 4 years. I think I'm about year 5 now. Anyway, I'm back here for the 13th episode of this. Not sure if I mean, I started out this as an experiment. And I have to remind myself and kind of measure my expectations to be in line with just that. I mean, it may not appeal to, I don't think it will appeal to the masses, but there may be a few people that walk away with some interesting information and maybe even a small fewer that walk away with something that's really touched them. And if that happens, then that's incredible. But I have gotten a lot out of this myself. There's been a few comments that I've received. I'm not talking about, compliments, but comments that have opened up um, some other research along the lines of things that have been opening up to me. And one of them was an African mystic named Somay or Patrice Somay. And that was very enlightening about, uncovering some of the work that he did after he was, kind of grabbed out of his tribal community in Africa and forced to learn Catholicism by some priests, and then escaped and went back home. And then they sent him back out into the world, and he got, some Western education and came over here to the United States and did some work with people here. And I found that very enlightening to see the different perspectives that he was shedding light on. And interestingly, he passed away during COVID 3 or 4 years ago. So, but his work really does kind of align with mine. I mean, I think my work originated where I am at the moment here in the Ozarks in Springfield, Missouri, where it was this mix between American Indian kind of culture that I was raised with, a few people that had settled here that you might call hillbillies, and then a highly educated, and I mean, there's some real Bible thumpers here. There's some real conservatives in the area, but there are some. Springfield is the hub of the area. It's a farming community. There's Amish in the area, as well as I think there's like 7 or 8 different colleges here. And it's a mecca for business and medicine and law, if you will. And so this was an interesting place to grow up and try to reconcile all those differences that I picked up on as a kid. And so anyway, I really appreciate the comments that I do get. Not a lot, but it is what it is. So I really appreciate that one. That really led me to some clarifying language and views, and not feeling so isolated and alone, because I've often been around some African Americans, as well as in my travels throughout the world. The oil business took me all over the world, and been in some other cultures where I really picked up on some native vibes that open some senses that I feel like I have access to, but I didn't really know how to place them. And some of the work that I'm kind of stumbling into is continuing to help me place some of that and feel some reconciliation. Hopefully that's not just me conditioning myself or my old conditioning, being satisfied with answers, but the fasting that I do and the rigorous exercise that I do in between, as well as, having a couple of near-death experiences and, you'll have to go back to Transcendent to hear on my other YouTube channel called Transcendent, or listen in on Future Wise Energy, my other YouTube channel where I talk about my work in oil and gas. But in Transcendent, I talk about some of the PTSD and how trauma opened up some viewpoints for me and helped me evolve into or devolve into who I am, right now. So that was one comment. Another one that I just went back and opened up today, because the other work that I've been involved in, kind of, piecing together some scriptures from the Bible, as well as some other um, things that were left out of the Bible, and trying to rationalize some of those into the evolution of mankind over the past. My focus is mostly on what's happened in the last 500 or 600 years, but I find myself reaching back into like the life of Christ 2,000 years ago to see what writings and influences were available to those people that ended up writing a lot of the scriptures that became part of the Bible. And I think that's even if you're not a Christian, it's powerful to examine that. In the same vein that Somay was encouraged by his elders to examine the other side that he had been, born into, to know more about that, and that was the African world, which was tribal and shamanic, and compare that to the Western world, which was really dominated initially by Catholicism, and then as the printing press let the cat out of the bag, so to speak, that the idea of Jesus really was to liberate and free man from the institutions that quickly reformed around him after his death and were built. And until the printing press came along and distributed the information, that people were kind of forced into, through their own lack of information and self-authority, and it didn't really get exposure to all of the teachings of Jesus um, until the Protestant movement, after the printing press, opened up the Bible. I think it was in Germany, just a few years after the printing press was invented. They started making copies of the Bible, and not long after that, you had Luther and some of the protests that began to create revolt, not just in Christianity or in the Catholic Church, but it ended up creating a whole movement of revolt against the establishment, where the individual eventually ended up, creating the United States of America and creating a constitution that was based on the whole idea of freedom and liberation. And interestingly, these people that wrote that were also using it to dominate others in the world, and they were dragging, kidnapping, stealing people from Africa to become slaves here in the United States. And I picked up on that vibe, and I also felt like, um, change just doesn't happen at birth. Like, babies don't have a fully clean entry into the world. They inherit some biology from their parents, DNA and so forth. And neuroscience has continued to confirm that for me. And then we have our ideas about what normal is. And now, as we have, so much broadcast since the 40s or 50s, when radio and TV came, and we had these ideas of how things should appear and look, that had really dramatically kind of homogenized the narrative of what's acceptable and unacceptable in society, and people started kind of playing to the superficial elements of the life experience, more than the depth of them. And so another piece of work that I have been led to potentially explore, and I believe that I will, is called the Holy Science. And I just now cracked that open. And it does also speak to our yearning for liberation and for freedom, which the U.S. Constitution, I don't think it necessarily, everyone really was living some of the principles that are behind the U.S. Constitution themselves. I mean, there were slave owners and, some people with some sordid moral, behavior that doesn't necessarily, in my mind, um, support the living proof or the people ask me, how do you do this, Mark? How do you get free? How do you break through some of the trauma, and how do you deal with living in a world that is full of the Democrats and the Republicans, or the good and the bad people, or the straight and the homosexuals, or the whatever your masculine versus feminine. Um, and they asked me, well, how do you do that? How do you reach a place where you're really free of the conditioning? Well, it takes time, and it takes a lot of work through those, the physicality of it. And I don't know that it's something that is meant to be encountered by everyone. I mean, it's not for me to say, but I did have written a long series of books that kind of outline the evolution of consciousness from a controlled or kind of domineering state into one that's more free and open. And that's available on Amazon. And I don't know anybody that's read all 20 of those books. I've got 5 more to throw out there. But it is a series that does lead, um, through using the novel approach, illustrates the different barriers that need to be faced and encountered. And so I am doing some things to try to illustrate how to do that. And I think if you piece together some of the work that I've done on transcendence, some of the how-to is buried in there. And it really comes back to facing some of the things that you may feel that are negative, and identifying those as aspects of yourself rather than projecting them on others. So I'm looking forward to opening up the holy um, science, and understanding more about what it is, what kind of light it's shedding on um, what people might call enlightenment, or deconditioning, or getting free. And I'll try to share my thoughts on that. But I had a highly productive week of creating some videos and doing some writing and blending some of the different masterpieces that I've come across of work to try to illustrate ways to see what's going on today, and not be as alarmed as you might, because some of the things that are alarming to you are really gateways to examining what's really going on inside of you, because that's what we only thing we have any influence over is ourselves. And we may feel like we're making progress or doing external things that are having um, an impact, but neuroscience, and then there's plenty of even social studies that are showing that those impact are the impact of a lot of those things that we think that we're doing on the external side are really having very little influence, and clearly we're repeating old patterns over and over and over again. And a lot of times, unless we ask, why, and really examine what's going on, we see that we're basically just repeating the patterns of our forefathers over and over and over again. And you can see that clearly. Following up on that work from that Somay put out there, you can see how if you're in a tribe in Africa and suddenly someone shows up in your backyard and starts cutting down trees and taking things that you've built your culture and your life around, that you may attack it. You may feel threatened. And, those people may be coming in with the mindset of trying to help these people, but just the outsider showing up and showing dominance over something that had been owned by and controlled and was used for the survival in those tribes. Um, those tribes are acting out against the Western, you know, um, people coming in on their turf. It's not about whether they're Christian or whether they're, just miners, or trying to harvest the trees or the rainforest for, whatever the pharmaceutical companies might be looking for there to to profit from in the name of Christianity. I mean, I'm not going to get into that game of trying to identify what the objective is of those people that are going over there. They may really be um, well-meaning toward trying to address or show something they believe in to people that have never been exposed to Christianity, and that's great. But they have to realize that it's often politicized or even turned into a power grab or a resource grab of oil, minerals, and other things that we sell from the planet. And there may ultimately be an element of that involved in the outsider being placed into the native environment. So that was something that Somay had spoke about quite a bit. And as I've been in the oil business and been around the world, the Middle East, Europe, South America, Central America, all over North America, of course, including Canada, and having some American Indian blood in me, and I can't leave out Indonesia or Malaysia, um, parts of Asia in my past. Seeing those cultures operate with that natural, a lot of those places have been around, and the cultures are so much more developed and have been there so much longer than where, like I'm speaking from here in Missouri, where um, the people that, if the native or someone came in and threatened the space here, people would also be upset. And they do get upset. The hillbillies, you could look at the movie Deliverance, by the way, and see how the people in I think that was shot and kind of looked around like it was in Appalachia. And you see how that culture that was behind the times, full of outcasts in the forest along that river. And you see these people that are really, came out there to do camping and kind of a survivalist weekend warrior thing that the people from Atlanta or from the city that were considered themselves civilized and above the hillbillies in that movie. Um, you can see the contrast there. But from the hillbilly perspective, those people were threatening their way of life, their survival. And although, to a Western viewer, seeing those people, um, the hillbillies, they seemed like they were backwards and deformed and not thinking right. And even they showed, photos of their teeth and illustrated, some behavioral examples that look like they were, um, to use the best term from today, neurodivergent. Um, you can see how the ignorance of both sides of the other and where they're coming from fueled the conflict and the drama that came out in the movie Deliverance. And I think we see that being politicized and used to lead masses around today. If I say that I'm doing something in the name of Christianity and put some videos out there and make some strong statements using the right words, I can secure a base, not my base, but a base. And you can do the same thing with the other side. You can show people that more liberal people might be inclined to um, identify with or feel for, and you can say some things on the other side to pull people in that direction. And I think that's where a lot of the division in our society is coming from. And I'm I'm quite confident that that's the source of it. And with 8 billion people, ultimately people's first move is about survival. And I think people look at me. One of the things I've had to deal with is that, I'll talk about, where I've been and what I've accomplished and what I've stepped away from in athletics and business and social, you know, settings where, I could have been this or I was this, and it really just didn't fit. And I found myself really trying to find a way to be where I am right now and deal with the early childhood traumas that I'd encountered and piece together all of the religious, cultural, education, the lives that I kept running into, and the people that kept coming to me looking for some explanations and answers. And so here I am on Mark's Headroom. I'm going to stop there. I'm going to go break my fast, and I hope this was a benefit to somebody. And like I said, if what I'm saying sounds, like something you're aligned with and you've heard something similar, I'd love to know who those similar people are. I don't tend to find that Google's algorithms necessarily identify my tribe or my crowd especially well, and neither do I, because I think we're few and far between. And so if this does reach and touch your heart, I really do appreciate your comments and reaching out, subscribing, and maybe exploring more of my work on roachcreative.com, where you can access my books and see some of the movies I've made, as well as tune into some of my other YouTube channels, and we'll take it from there. Hope you have a great weekend and happy holiday.